What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. I want to continue to examine 100 years of world championship fights. I want to pick up where I left off with Sam Langford. I had a tribute going with Sam Langford, my greatest fighter of all times. Because Sam Langford passed away in 1956, and that's about where we are in this series. Now I have to go back to two more fights in 1955. Archie Moore and Rocky Marciano, as well as Carl Bobo Olsen and Ray Robinson. It would be Ray Robinson's comeback, third reign as a middleweight champion. But with Sam Langford, he was born March 4th, 1886. Now I want to make a correction in my last video with Sam Langford. I stated March 4th, 1883. Because I do all these videos at the top of my head. And I have so many dates in my head, it's not even funny. And I had 1883 because a lot of records have 1883 for some reason. For some reason, it stuck with me. I don't know why. But I want to thank 8 Sins for bringing it to my attention. I appreciate that. But Sam Langford had died January 12, 1956. Now, early in his days, his job was a logger and an ox driver. An ox driver is a person standing behind a mechanism that is connected to 2 or 4 oxes. And the ox's jobs are to pull the mechanism so that it turns up the soil, turns up or uproots the dirt, and you can plant fresh fruits and vegetables. And Sam Langford's job as a 14-year-old boy was to steer the oxes in the direction in which he wanted them to go. And that's a hard job. Because he's in charge not only to make sure he steers them in the right direction, but he has to make sure that the tires that may break or snap, he replaces them. He has to make sure that the foot of the cattle or the oxes that may sink into the mud as they normally would do, he has to make sure he gets them out. He has to make sure that the soil is evenly laid for the proper usage of the soil. Concede correctly and grow fresh vegetables. But not only did he have to do that, he had to do it for about 3 to 4 or 5 miles worth of land. Property that did not belong to him as a 14-year-old boy. He was also a cabinet boy, worked on ships, and he would aboard the ship, land in Massachusetts, and was fired after traveling by foot, finding work as a bricklayer and lumberyard worker, getting into fights with co-workers, not accepting or disrespect of him. From the experiences of his father, who abused him while he was in Canada. And Sam would find himself getting into fights all the time with his father as a young boy. In protection of himself. So he decided to leave from another country, and he would land in America. Boston, to be exact. And after landing a job in Boston at the Atlantic Athletic Club as a janitorial worker, Joe Woodson, who owned the gym and witnessed Sam knocking out his best sparring partners and sparring fighters without experiencing glove matches, couldn't believe what he was watching. And at the age of 15, Woodson would decide to choose Langford as a better way of life, entering into amateur shows, where Sam Langford would knock out all his opponents to become the Boston amateur champion. 1901. And this was at the age of 15. 1902, at the age of 16, he turned professional as a lightweight and found himself in a ring after several fights with the old master, Joe Gans. And what was amazing about this, he had just turned 17. And to his understanding, it would be for a title shot. But he didn't make weight. It was to his understanding, as a 17-year-old, that he didn't have to make that particular weight. And he would defeat Joe Gans. Now, to Joe Gans' credit, a day before that fight, December 8th, 1903, with Sam Langford, Joe Gans traveled 300 miles from Philadelphia, and he faced Dave Holly, one of the most craftiest defensive fighters that Sam Langford would face, better alone Joe Gans. And Dave Holly had a beautiful defensive style, but later be called the shoulder roll, that he would design to prevent from getting hit solidly on the chin. It would allow him to rock off his back foot, come back with a counterpunch. September 5th, 1904, Sam Langford took on Joe Walcott, the Barbados Demon. 1904, at the age of 18, he would go 15 rounds and they would call it a draw. And this would infuriate the observers because they all believed that Sam Langford had outpointed the Barbados Demon. So that was 2 world championship shots that would go by the wayside of Sam Langford. Now, Sam Langford would become the world colored middleweight champion at the age of 19 in 1905. April 26, 1906, he would face the world colored heavyweight champion, Jack Johnson. 15 rounds. He would lose to him at the age of 20. Weighed 156 pounds and Jack Johnson weighed 189 pounds. Jack Johnson was basically 20 pounds over the weight of Sam Langford. Now, Langford would be known as the Boston Tar Baby. I want to take it back to 1903 for one moment, because 1903 was some year. Not only did he get an opportunity to face Joe Gans, and he would defeat Joe Gans, who was the world lightweight champion. Jack Johnson would become the colored heavyweight champion when he defeated Denver Ed Martin. I want to think about that for one moment. Now, if Jack Johnson became the colored heavyweight champion in 1903 when he defeated Denver Ed Martin, Sam Langford would fight for the lightweight champion that same year, 1903. And he would defeat the lightweight champion of the world. Also that year, you had a young man by the name of Jack Root, who was a middleweight. Pretty successful at middleweight. And Joe Woodson went after the managers of several fighters. One was Jack Root. He challenged him. He wanted to place Sam Langford across the ring of Jack Root. And Sam Langford was becoming a problem in the fisticuff community. He was feared in the North and the South. So much, though, that Jack Root had nowhere else to go. You see, they didn't have light heavyweight during those years. Next man he would have had to have faced would have been Jim Jeffries in the heavyweight division. Now, the promoter for Jack Root, name was Lou Houseman. He was out of Chicago. He was a newspaperman. He was also the manager of Jack Root. And Jack Root scores many middleweight victories, but he had trouble making the weight, as they say, which was 158 pounds. And Lou Houseman had presented the idea to create a weight division in between the middleweight and the heavyweight divisions. He was also a sports editor from around the country. And he was able to get them to support the idea of creating the light heavyweight division, which was 175 pounds. And he did it along with James Karpov, who was a colleague of him. April 22nd, 1903, Jack Root would face Jim McCoy. His name was the Kid McCoy, known as the corkscrew punch. Fought him in Detroit, Michigan, 10-round contest. The title at stake. And Jack Root would outpoint Kid McCoy. And became part ownership of the light heavyweight championship belt. Now, I said part ownership because Jack Root had to face another fighter. That other fighter's name was George Gardner. And George Gardner would face Marvin Hart. And after he defeated Marvin Hart, then he had to face Jack Root to solidify the championship belt. And that's the first time that the world championship belt would be unified. The first time that a championship belt was unified. Was between two fighters, George Byers and Frank Childs. Now, Jack Root would face George Gardner, Buffalo, New York, and be knocked out in 12 rounds. So it didn't quite work out the way Lou Houseman figured it would. So you had a light heavyweight division that was developed by a promoter / newspaper writer / manager of a fighter, Jack Root, who was a middleweight, that tried to get out of Dodge when he saw Sam Langford coming into town. How we know this is because Sam Langford's manager, Joe Woodson, had challenged Lou Houseman for Sam Langford to get a shot at Jack Root, who was the leading middleweight contender at that time. And this wouldn't be the first time that Sam Langford was sidestepped. Joe Wilson called out Jack Dillon, the Giant Slayer, light heavyweight champion. He called out Carl Morris of Tucson, Oklahoma. Wilson called out Al McCoy. He called out Jack Britton, who was a welterweight champion. And by the way, Al McCoy, middleweight champion. Jack Dillon was a light heavyweight champion. Carl Morris was a heavyweight. Now, to give you somewhat of an idea how great Sam Langford was, let's discuss 1916. One of his most phenomenal years. January, he would face Harry Wills. He would lose to him in 20 rounds. Andrew Johnson, he would knock him out. February of 1916. February 11th, Harry Wills, knock him out in 19 rounds. It was at the Tommy Burns Arena. February 17th of 1916. Sam McVeigh, he would defeat him, New York's Madison Square Garden. February 28th, Cleve Hawkins, who he would defeat at Lawn Acres, AC, New York. March 7th, 1916. Harry Wills, we lose to him at the Broadway Arena, which is located in Brooklyn. Now, the Broadway Arena, now you would have the roller skating ring. That's where the Broadway Arena used to be. It was on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, New York. Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. And if you go over a few blocks, You have Ebbets Field. They tore that down and they moved over to Los Angeles. But there's a housing development called Ebbets Field. Well, that's where Broadway Arena was. It was on Eastern Parkway, Crown Heights, Brooklyn. March 23rd, Dave Mills. We defeat him, Syracuse Arena. March 31st, Jeff Clark, the Joplin Ghost. We defeat him at the Future City AC in St. Louis. April 7th, Sam McVeigh. He would defeat him, Syracuse Arena. April 25th, Harry Wills. We lose to him, St. Louis Coliseum. May 2nd, Sam McVeigh would be a draw at the East Market Street Arena, which is Aiken, Ohio. Now, think about all the different states he had to travel. We're still in 1916. May 12th, Joe Jeanette. He would defeat him in Syracuse Arena. That's way upstate New York. August 12th, Sam McVeigh, a draw in Italy. November 30th, Bill Tate, Syracuse Arena, draw. December 12th, Battling Jim Johnson, Future City AC, St. Louis. December 29th, Bob DeVerse, Montreal, Canada, would defeat him. Now, Richard K. Fox had created a tournament for black fighters, but the winner will only receive a gold-plated cup. Richard K. Fox, as racist as can be, he would develop the Police Gazette, which I have every issue of. But he would create a belt for the white fighters that weighed 5 pounds. 1-point diamonds all around the belt. Jade and pearls around the belt. Ruby diamonds. Beautiful Police Gazette belt that would be designed for the white fighters, but the black fighters got a cup. It was gold plated. And the belt that was created for the white fighters, solid gold. So much so that it weighed 5 pounds. But even he had to succumb to the Peter Jacksons of the world, Black Prince, George Godfrey of the world. He admired them, their ability. Sam Langford was on another level. He defeated young Peter Jackson 4 times, Jeff Clark, the Joplin Ghost 5 times, Bill Tate 4 times, Sam McVeigh 7 times, George Godfrey 2 times, Dixie Kid 2 times, Joe Jeanette 8 times, Harry Wills twice, Dave Holly, Fireman Jim Flynn 4 times, knocked him out in 7 minutes. Fireman Jim Flynn was stretched out for about 7 minutes. Wouldn't move a muscle. And that's the same Fireman Jim Flynn that would knock out Jack Dempsey, the Manasseh-Mola, 1 round. Kid Norfolk would be the colored light heavyweight champion. Ed Gunboat Smith, George Elbow McFadden would have 63 colored championship fights. He would defeat world champion Stanley Ketchel, Tiger Flowers, and Kid Williams, as well as Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who he would stop. Those are the world champions. He would lose to Fred Fulton twice, Harry Wills 13 times, Jack Johnson once, Joe Jeanette twice, Dave Holly once, and Jeff Clark, the Joplin Ghost. That's not even a handful of the fights that he fought. Sam Langford fought over 500 fights. A lot of them were unrecorded. A lot of them were no decisions. A lot of them were no contest. Sam Langford would fight in backwoods. He would witness a man hanging before he walked into the ring. Where you had men on a horse on each side with shotguns. He doesn't know whether or not he's supposed to win or he's supposed to lose. When he glances over and watches a man hanging. Sam Langford had faced men in knee-deep water with water moccasins. But he's in the water, and his opponent is ankle-deep. You see, what Sam Langford has gone through is unthinkable. And to classify him with other fighters outside of 1920 is an insult. Because what he had to deal with in everyday life, with discriminations, with slavery, signs all over colored only. He was in company with names of the Darky Wizard, Black Pearl, Sam Langford had endured all that. Stanley Ketchel would defeat Harry Thomas for the middleweight championship of the world. And he would face Sam Langford, but never give Sam Langford another shot. And he was willing to do so, but unfortunately for Stanley Ketchel, he would be killed by Walter Dipley. Now I want to show you a couple of articles and a few of the scrapbooks that I have here. The man who knocked out Jack Dempsey. This man here, Fireman Jim Flynn. Jim Flynn in his street attire. Now, Jim Flynn fought Sam Langford several times. He was knocked out in the first round. And he was out for 7 straight minutes. And it didn't look like he was going to make it. But he knocked out Jack Dempsey in 1 round. Some say it was controversial because they claimed that his brother, Jack Dempsey's brother, threw in the towel at the same time. But Jack Dempsey got hammered. But Fireman Jim Flynn. Jim Flynn couldn't handle the great Sam Langford. Here you have Harry Wells. Floyd Johnson on a scale. Harry Wells never got his opportunity with Jack Dempsey, but he was in a ring with Sam Langford 22 times. Fascinating fighter Harry Wells was. Battling Siki and Kid Norfolk. Siki was the light heavyweight champion. And Kid Norfolk was the colored light heavyweight champion. You have Sam Langford. As he knocks out, they call him the Boston Tar Baby. He knocked out Gunbo Smith in the 3rd round. What was scheduled for a 20-round contest? It was in Boston, Massachusetts, October 20th. Sam Langford was something else. This is my Sam Langford scrapbook, 1,000 pages of all Sam Langford. It's the only page I'm going to show you in this book. This entire book is Sam Langford. I might be one of the few that have something like this. I didn't think I would show this page, but we're talking about Sam Langford, and I want to pay perfect homage. This entire book is Sam Langford. Harry Wills proved tough. Tough customer for Langford. I'll show you another page. This is the great Harry Wills. Now I want to show you something. Now all of these men, as you can see here, John O'Sullivan, number 10. Number 9, you have Tommy Burns. And the very last person in the back, 23. That's Bob Armstrong. He's next to Ruby Robb, number 19. And Tom Sharkey. They call him a Sailor Man. Bob Armstrong was a colored heavyweight champion. He would pick up the vacant strap and the Black Prince Peter Jackson would vacate the belt. But he was his sparring partner of Bob Fitzsimmons, who was a 3-time champion. Middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight. February 1903. Sam McVeigh to your to your right. And Jack Johnson is to your left. We're fighting Los Angeles. They will both be a colored heavyweight champion. Jack Johnson would be the world heavyweight champion when he would knock out Tommy Burns in 14 rounds in Sydney, Australia. Here you have Sam Langford faces Sam McVeigh for the Australian Heavyweight Championship belt, and Sam Langford would win. Langford is to your right, McVeigh is to your left. These two men, Sam Langford to your left and Harry Wills to your right, will go at it 22 times. That's amazing. The Barbados Demon, Joe Walcott, was some fighter. Sam Langford would defeat him in 1904, but they would call it a draw. Black fighters during those days didn't get quite the opportunities that they should have. So they just unfortunately have to go down in history of what could have been. These are great fighters. And I always recognize them for what they are, great fighters. Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. So I'll go through some of the scrapbooks of some of the black fighters that I have. I have 2 scrapbooks, 1,000 pages each, 2,000 front and back, 4,000 total of exclusive information on black fighters. Amazing information in these books. An article that states Dempsey, quote, "I was afraid of Sam Langford." Sam Langford walked into the office of Jack Kearns and Jack Dempsey because they heard they were looking for an opponent. And it was stated, "Sam, we're not looking for someone that good." Thanks for hanging in there with me. This is part 2 of the great Sam Langford. We'll continue 100 years of world championship fights. Shout out to Zeno, my brother Kurt Sugar, Hardline Boxing. Peace.